everyone. Welcome to our webinar for this afternoon. My name is Judy Brous, and I'm the Executive Director of the North American Association for Environmental Education. And unfortunately, we do not have a free lunch, but we do have a free webinar, and it's going to be great. I'm so excited about today and so happy to have all of you joining. I also want to just thank all our affiliate co-sponsors and co-hosts who are helping to support our webinar. We're so excited to have everybody on board and really excited to hear what our guest speaker has to say, because today it's all about collective impact. What does it mean to cultivate collective impact? And Dr. Nicole Ardoin has done quite a bit of work on collective impact, and I'll introduce Nicole more formally in a minute. Just wanted to, for those of you who are new to our webinar series, we've been trying to do this all year on the fourth Tuesday of every month at 3 o'clock. Sometimes we have to change that based on the availability of the speaker. But what we're trying to do is just bring new ideas, new thinking, insights into the field of environmental education and related fields that will help us all do our work better. And next month, we're really excited to have Kristen Grimm, who's the founder and president of Spitfire Strategies, who will be talking about strategic communications on August 23rd at 3 o'clock Eastern Daylight Time. For those of you who were at the Baltimore conference, you heard Kristen give a keynote. She's one of the best strategic communicators pretty much on the planet. So we're really excited to have her as our next webinar. So what we're going to do today is, after this quick introduction of Nicole and how to use the system, Nicole is going to give a presentation, and there'll be some interactive features throughout, and then we'll try and leave some questions at the end. And just know that we'll be following up on EE Pro, so that if your question doesn't get answered on this webinar, check out the Research and Evaluation EE Pro group, and you'll get a chance to carry on the conversation. And Nicole's going to be checking that for the rest of the week and adding insights, and then any closing thoughts that we have. So I hope that sounds okay to everyone. And I'm going to ask Kristen to say just a few words about how Click Webinar works, just in case anybody has any issues.
Thank you, Judy. So just real quickly to go over using Click Webinar. For those who aren't able to hear me, I guess they'll need to read this slide. But you can join the phone conference if you're having audio troubles through your computer. And the phone number to connect through the phone line is right there on the slide if you ever do lose your audio connection through the computer. And just so that you're aware, all the phone lines are muted. But I will tell you how you can interact with us if you have any questions or issues. So it looks like all of you have good experience with using the chat box function, but if you have a question or a comment, you can use the chat box at the bottom of your screen to ask any questions or raise any concerns throughout the webinar. You can also interact with us by clicking the little smiley face in the bottom right-hand corner of your screen, where you can raise a concern, agree or disagree with something, or say that you need us to speak louder or softer. And following Nicole's presentation, we will provide an opportunity to do some questions and answers. Nicole will also open up the floor for some questions throughout her presentation as well. And all you'll do is continue to use the chat box to pose your questions, and we will field those questions to Nicole, and she will respond.
Thanks, Kristen. And I just want to thank Kristen again for all that she has done to help make this webinar series a success. So thrilled to have you, Kristen. And Kristen and I will be monitoring the chat box, so please feel free at any time to send any comments that you have, as well as contact us afterwards. Okay, so now not to cut into any more of Nicole's time, and we're so happy, Nicole, to have you as our guest speaker and to see you in your office at Stanford. Let me give a little bit of an introduction to you. I really am so excited to introduce you because, as you know, we've been longtime colleagues and friends, and you are an amazing leader in the field. For those of you who don't know Nicole, she's an associate professor in the Graduate School of Education and a center fellow with the Woods Institute for the Environment at Stanford University. Her research focuses on environmental learning and environmental behavior with an interest in informal settings integrated social ecological systems, and a sense of place. She also researches the use of education and communication approaches to engage individuals and communities in collaborative decision-making related to natural resource management. Nicole doesn't look like she has 20 years of experience, but she does, working in the nonprofit, environmental education, and informal science sectors. She's particularly committed to community-engaged research, as well as studies motivated by the intersection of research and practice. Her research collaborators have included nonprofit, environmental conservation organizations, parks, and protected areas. I was very lucky to work with Nicole for many years, including at World Wildlife Fund, where we developed a traveling exhibit on biodiversity, and at the National Audubon Society, where she helped evaluate Together Green. Some of you I see on here were Together Green Fellows, which was helping to build leadership in the field. Nicole received her PhD in Forestry and Environmental Studies from Yale University, where she researched sense of place and environmental behavior in ecoregion conservation efforts. She also has an MS in Natural Resource Management from the University of Wisconsin at Stevens Point. Nicole is in high demand everywhere, and I don't know how she gets all of this done, but she serves as an associate editor in the Journal of Environmental Education Research and on the editorial board of the Journal of Environmental Education and Children, Youth, and Environment. She's an advisor to the Brainerd Foundation and the George B. Storer Foundation, and she sits on a number of boards and advisory councils, including on NAAE's Advisory Council, the Blue Sky Funders Forum, the Monterey Bay Aquarium, Nature Bridge, and the Teton Science Schools. And she's partnering with NAAE on Anecdotes to Evidence, which is looking at how to demonstrate the value and impact of environmental education. So let's give Nicole a big virtual welcome, and Nicole, take it away.
Great. Can you all hear me? Can I get like a little, someone's typing, yes, yay, okay, great. I'm trying to speak into my speakerphone as opposed to holding the, oh yes, look at all those wonderful smiley faces, hello, and all those people I know and love. This is so fun. The whole webinar thing is kind of funny because it's not the same as like being in a room where I get to see all these amazing people. But I get to see you virtually, which is terrific. So thanks so much. I'm excited to be here with all of you today. Although, as I told Judy, I have this old clunky computer, and so I might turn off the video at some point if it seems like it's kind of slowing down the clicking through of the PowerPoint. So I'm really thrilled to be talking with you all today about something that's near and dear to my heart, which is the overall notion of collaboration. And one framework for talking about that is collective impact. And so I wanted to start just by saying that, which is that, you know, I think that I don't want to necessarily say that I'm evangelizing collective impact, and I actually really appreciate the fact that FSG, the group, which is kind of the originator of collective impact, would also kind of say the same thing, that if you listen to them talk about it and they host conferences around this, they would say that the notion of collaboration is an old idea and that collective impact is just one way of thinking about it. And so that's what we'll be focusing on today, is kind of one framework around collaboration. And what I'd like to do is I'll talk a little bit about what are some of the principles of collective impact, how those principles might help us think about collaboration. I'll ground it in a specific example that I know some of you on the call are part of the Change Scale group, which is a collective impact framework model that we have here in the San Francisco Monterey Bay Area region. Now I'll talk about some opportunities and challenges we've had here in the region related to that. And I'd like to leave some time at the end for some questions and some discussion. And as Judy has suggested, what we'd really love to do is use this webinar as an opportunity to really spark discussion in the field of environmental education, environmental learning, environmental literacy, around how we can build more of these kinds of collaboratives, whether they're place-based collaboratives like Change Scale has been for us, or whether they're more of these virtual collaboratives, thinking about organizations like NAAE as backbone organizations, really creating a place where we can kind of come together. So with that, I would like to move forward. I just wanted to kind of give you a roadmap of where we're going, but I'd like to move forward and start with asking you a question, and we're going to start out by testing some of the interactive opportunities that we have here on the webinar. And Kristen is going to help make this interactive. It's your opportunity now to respond to us and let us know, have you participated in or are you currently participating in a collective impact effort? And your three choices are yes, no, or not sure. since we haven't exactly discussed yet what collective impact means. So I'll give you a minute to answer that question. You should be able to answer that. There should be a way to answer that through the webinar function.
Looking good. People are answering.
People are answering? All right.
I voted.
You did. Okay, Kristen, and is there a way for them to actually vote on, can they vote on their screen, Kristen? Is that how they do it? They can send votes, is that right?
Yep. And then it'll tell you, thank you for your participation and vote.
Okay. Got it. Let's give people like another 30 seconds to vote, is that right? I see people in the comment box commenting. All right. So Kristen, maybe I'll let you, aha, there we go. Aha, nice. Oh, this is very cool. All right, so I see, and do you all see the responses as well? So we see that we've got about 47% of people say yes, that they have participated or are currently participating in collective impact efforts. About 13% say no, and 27% not sure, which is okay because we haven't actually gotten to the formal definition yet. So that's actually pretty good. I mean, we've got about half of you have had some experience with this. So that's actually great. It gives us kind of a baseline of where we can go from here. What I'd like to do is I'd like to move forward then with talking a little bit about what do we actually mean by collective impact. And it's exciting to see that this idea is out there in the environmental education world. I think part of this is because those of us who are in the field of environmental education, environmental ed is, I find it actually a fascinating field because so many of us who are in environmental education are also coming to this field from other areas. As you heard from my bio that Judy shared, I come to this from the conservation world. I come to this from working in natural resources and conservation. Many of you are perhaps coming from the education world or maybe working also in the nonprofit world. And collective impact is one of those really great and interesting ideas, I think, that comes from so many different sectors. So it's an approach to collaboration, as I mentioned earlier, that really comes to us from the nonprofit and consulting world. And in the past, many nonprofits have kind of worked individually to try to address issues. And so these can be issues in healthcare, they can be issues in international development, often issues in environment. And traditionally what has been the approach is that a lot of times smaller organizations have felt compelled to kind of draw a wall around the kind of work that they're doing, perhaps because, especially as we can see in environment and in education, resources are often scarce. And so what happens a lot of times in a resource-scarce environment is that people feel the need to kind of hold on to what they have. And when we're talking about scarce resources, we're often talking about resources in terms of your staff, in terms of program participants, in terms of funding, of course. And so what that can cause you to do is to really kind of hunker down and focus on what your program is trying to do. And yet, in what we're seeing now is that as we have these increasingly large scale, both in terms of scope, the larger and more challenging the problems, but also temporally, it's really requiring us to have these new approaches to collaboration. And so in 2011, FSG, which is a consulting group, had an article that came out in the Stanford Social Innovation Review, and it was talking about this notion of collective impact. And as I alluded to in the introduction, Kanya and Kramer, who are the authors of that article, said that what they were trying to do is they actually were really inspired by collaboratives, and I actually see in some of the chat boxes here that some of you are part of these collaboratives. They were inspired by looking around and actually kind of from a ground up way seeing what were some successful collaboratives doing. And what they found in these successful collaboratives is that successful groups working together were trying to work toward enhancing trust, enhancing alignment among their efforts, enhancing commitment among these efforts with the idea of having a greater sense of efficacy and a greater sense of impact on policy. And so that's how they then came up with this idea of calling it collective impact. So again, not necessarily doing something new, but rather putting a new framework on what groups were already doing. So the principles around collective impact are, we initially had these 5 elements of collective impact, and then there's a 6th one that's more recently been added. So I'll start with the initial 5, and then I'll come to the 6th one that's actually a really critical one. So the initial 5 elements of collective impact were that this idea that organizations from a number of different sectors, so not only a nonprofit sector, although that was really the impetus for it originally, was the nonprofit sector coming together with the business sector, coming together with the government sector, all around some kind of common agenda. So if in this conversation, we're really focusing on environmental education, but if you're talking about, again, the health sector, or you're focusing perhaps more on formal education, there's some kind of common agenda, some kind of common issue. And then within that, you're also committing to some kind of shared measurement. So if there's an issue, you're kind of thinking about how are we moving toward addressing that issue or solving that issue, and we're committing to having a shared measurement or some kind of shared measures and metrics that help us know that we're making progress on that issue. We're also committing to, as a collective, we're committing to undertake some kind of mutually reinforcing activities, which of course, if we think about any kind of good collaboration, we want to think about not working at cross purposes to each other, but rather how can we think about activities that really they're synergistic. And at the core of that certainly are these principles of continuous communication. So open lines of communication among the organizations, which, of course, as any of us who've worked in collaboratives, that sometimes is easier said than done. And one piece that was and is perhaps a little bit surprising, and it maybe makes this collective impact framework a little bit different, and I think is really a cornerstone of this framework, is this notion of backbone support. And when you listen to Kanya and Kramer talk about collective impact, they really emphasize this notion of backbone support. And in fact, actually, I went to a talk by them a few years ago, and they were really hammering on this idea that a backbone is critical in collective impact. And what this means is it's some either organization or individual to which all the partners in a collective impact effort make a commitment, and to which there is actually a funded commitment to having some kind of platform that provides support to that collaborative. And so the difference when, so I think kind of skeptics of collective impact will say, well, how is collective impact any different than just good collaboration? And many of these other elements you'll see probably aren't different than good collaboration. But one of the elements that does tend to be a bit different is that in good collaboration, you don't necessarily provide funding or provide ongoing support to a backbone. But what the backbone does is that backbone its sole purpose is to support the collaborative. And so that is something that's really critical in collective impact, is that you have either an organization or an individual whose sole purpose is to be dedicated to the mission of collaboration. And then this 6th principle is this notion of diversity, equity, and inclusion is forming the platform on which all these other elements are being based. And initially, this was not a piece of the elements, and yet, as you'll see in just a minute when I get into talking about Change Scale, which is our collective impact initiative here in the Bay Area, this was really a foundation of the work that we've been doing here. And I think that, I think the Kanya and Kramer saw that with many of the successful collective impact initiatives around the country, this has mostly been U.S. focused, the examples that they've used, U.S. and Canada, that this diversity, equity, inclusion piece is really, really critical. And also, as I've talked to some of you offline, and I know a lot of people are aware, there also have been some critiques of the collective impact model, and I think a lot of it has been this kind of need for really focusing on and recognizing this kind of ground up and grassroots approach, which is recognizing that this kind of equity and inclusion piece is critical. Oh, I'm going to try to click on, there we go. So what I'd like to move into, if there aren't, and I'm not seeing any specific questions at this stage about kind of what is the core collective impact, so I'd like to move into saying then kind of, so why do we care about this in environmental education? So why does this matter for environmental education? Why is this relevant for our work? And for this, I'd like to just say that in environmental education, as we're talking about this idea of kind of scope and scale and large-scale problems, environmental education seems to be one of those issues that is really ripe for thinking about how might we enhance the efficacy of our efforts. I would argue, and I think I'm probably not the only one, I think this is probably why a lot of you are here, that we are at a time in terms of environmental issues that are facing our planet, and also at a time in terms of the ways that our communities are working together, that we're really ripe for opportunities to come together in terms of nonprofit organizations, government organizations, foundations, and funders to work collaboratively toward addressing some of the most pressing environmental issues of our times. And for example, in California, there have been some real incredible efforts in terms of looking at taking the temperature of the population in California and thinking about how are people feeling about opportunities for education and environmental education. And in California several years ago, there was a poll that was done by the Public Policy Institute of California. And in that poll, we saw that nearly 90% of Californians were really in support of having environmental education in schools, and yet only 13% of schools actually have any sort of environment integrated into the curriculum. And it suggested to us that there was an opportunity here to really bring together some kind of collective effort among all of the nonprofit providers as well as the schools to think about how can we do a better job of providing this backbone support. So it seemed to us that, especially in California, there was an opportunity for this. Now, again, I'm going to make a transition here into thinking about how might this apply in California. But I would suggest, and as Judy mentioned in the intro here, I personally have done quite a bit of work on the national scale and thinking about, looking at those of you who are participating in the webinar. I know a lot of you are working both regionally as well as nationally on some of these issues. So I'm going to transition now for about the next 10 to 15 minutes into kind of talking about a regional scale example, but I'd love it if you would think also about kind of how might some of these regional examples apply to your work, and then also what might this mean for the kind of work that NAAEE is doing to bring us all together nationally. So the California example suggested to us, just from the data that we had, it suggested to us that there was an opportunity here that was kind of going unfilled. And so what we did was we started to think about what were some of those opportunities for creating that common agenda. So if you go back to think about what were those principles, the common agenda was that need for how do we transform environmental education from this kind of nice to have, where we had 90% of people saying that it would be really nice to have environmental education in schools, to a need to have. How do we get those people to really advocate on behalf of environmental education in schools and also partnership with the out-of-school sector? How do we also kind of coalesce what at the time felt to us to be a bit of a disparate sector? I'll go back to what I said earlier about, so many of us coming from different areas, coming from natural resources or conservation or education or, the health sector. And it felt to us that there was a bit of a kind of a disconnect among all these different organizations. So that seemed to us to be another opportunity. And then also we really felt that there was a need and opportunity for us to kind of gain a common understanding of some of the barriers to environmental education and some of the opportunities. So these questions seemed, at least in the San Francisco and Monterey Bay areas regionally, to really suggest that there's an opportunity here for creating some kind of common agenda. So about 4 years ago, in collaboration with several colleagues from several larger nonprofits in the San Francisco Bay Area, as a researcher and then also as someone coming from the nonprofit field, I worked in collaboration with them with some funding from several of the foundations in the area. We conducted a series of listening sessions. And what we did in those listening sessions, and this goes back to, I think, perhaps some of the critiques of the collective impact frame, is that some of the critiques have been that often that framework is applied in a very top-down way from consulting firms. And and I should also back up a little bit to say that at this point we actually weren't using the collective impact frame. At this point we were just kind of trying to take the temperature of what was happening locally. And so what we did was we conducted a series of listening sessions with organizations in the Bay Area, large and small. We also conducted a series of listening sessions at the national level. Some of them were even international. I happened to be going to a conference that was in Australia, and so I talked to a number of my colleagues, researchers and some practitioners in Australia about kind of what was the need in the environmental education sector. And some of you'll see here on the slide some of the things that we heard. We heard this need for better coordination, for some shared measures and metrics. You'll hear some kind of echoes here of what we talked about earlier. Some need for some cross-sector collaboration, some opportunities for that. And also this real desire for some connections between research and practice, which of course is music to my ears. As you heard in the introduction, and for those of you who know that's a real passion for me as well. And so growing out of that was this opportunity for what we saw to be a really interesting collaborative. And the collaborative later was named Change Scale. And initially we started out just calling it the Environmental Education Collaborative, although as I've seen in some of the comments, I think a lot of us are working on environmental education collaboratives. So we wanted a name that was slightly different. And that's another story which we can talk about later. But you know, coming up with a name was part of our initiative. So as part of this, we developed Change Scale, which was a partnership of 9 founding organizations initially. And for the first couple of years, in 2011 and 2012, we met every 6 to 8 weeks. And as you'll start to see, and this is kind of the echoes of continuous conversation and communication. And we met around that guiding question of how do we transform environmental education from a nice to have to a need to have. And so for each organization, we really asked for a commitment. And the commitment was that we wanted a senior level leader, and we wanted also a leader, we wanted someone who was really working on the ground. And this gets back again to kind of trying to get away from that critique of collective impact feeling like it's really far from the ground. We wanted to feel like we had someone who was working on the ground in communities, who had a good sense of what was happening in schools, what was happening in communities, so that we had the opportunity to feel like whatever was implemented from this collaborative was really reflecting what was needed by teachers, by school administrators, by families and communities, so that it didn't feel like this initiative was coming far from the ground. We also felt like we wanted to have an initiative that was very much reflective of what people in communities said that they needed. And I'd like here to go back to that 6th principle of diversity and inclusion and equity. My own work has been a lot around this notion of environmental learning within a Bay Area context within the last couple of years. And I think one of the things that we've learned from that research has been this challenge around kind of developing programs in a vacuum within a large organization and then kind of going out and bringing that program to the community. And I know also from seeing some of the participants today that so many of you are really passionate about that kind of work. And so I think that one of the key elements, and as you'll see in the next slide, from the theory of change that we developed for Change Scale, was this idea of not wanting it to feel like it was a top-down effort that didn't incorporate the concerns, the desires, the needs of the community, but rather grew out of what the community would want to see from a collaborative effort. The type on here looks really small to me. Maybe it's bigger to you. And this is something, actually, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this because we only have about 15 more minutes or so together here today. But I will say that on the Change Scale website, we actually have all of our documents we have all of our documents that you can kind of dig into. You can look at all the background on them. I wanted to share with you briefly that we developed a theory of change together. And I think the most important thing to say about this, just in light of, again, this is kind of a flyby, and today's focus is really on this notion of collective impact. And the reason I wanted to share this with you is that as part of collective impact, I think it was really important for us to, as a group of organizations, work together through the painful process of coming up with something that was a shared vision of change. It took us a year to develop this schematic, which really depicts how we envisioned that our collective efforts could enhance, as you'll see in the two bottom layers of the soil here, the field impact and also the ultimate impact. And so we spent a lot of time talking about what we wanted to have as groups of organizations working together be our field impact and our ultimate impact. In hindsight, we probably could have spent more time talking about this, but this is something I'll get to in a minute. I think, you end up with dilemmas when you're working together in this collaborative way around how much time do you spend thinking and planning versus how much time do you actually spend implementing, which I think can be, which can be a challenge in a collective impact process. So we ended up with a two-part goal for the overall collective impact process of change scale, which is that we have been working towards supporting the improved effectiveness of the field within the San Francisco and Monterey Bay areas by improving the collaboration and quality and relevance and engagement of Bay Area environmental education providers, because our focus really at that scale was really around the providers. The second piece was to really forge community partnerships with schools. So we made the decision to focus on the schools. And this gets back to that idea that, to have that common agenda was really important for us. And this is a longer conversation I'm happy to have with anyone, perhaps on the follow-up over the next couple of weeks. But it was, one of the biggest challenges, I think, in collective impact is to come to what is your common agenda. And the common agenda could have been everything from, focusing on community engagement to building community, to building skills within the community to focusing on schools. And at some point, we had to kind of come down and say, we're going to focus on K-12 students, we're going to focus on schools. And again, from seeing who's participating today, I know that, we have people from the informal sector, we have people from the formal sector, we have people from foundations, we have people from conservation and from health. And I think just, as a collaborative, trying to decide what is going to be the core is one of the really important things when you're interested in thinking about a collective impact approach. So I also want to take one step back here to go back to the overall topic of this webinar today, which is to say that, in retrospect, looking back at this, it seems kind of so neat and to say, oh, collective impact, we've got all these pieces to it here. We've got, kind of this common agenda, and we've got these common goals. Well, actually, when we first started working on ChangeGo, we actually didn't know about collective impact, and it wasn't our intention to set out to kind of have some kind of model collective impact effort. We actually organized to do some kind of collaborative work, and then we started reading in the literature, and we started working with some consulting firms, and we started to think about how did we actually want to organize our efforts. And we found the collective impact framework to be one that worked well for us. But I'd like to emphasize again here that a framework is only as good as it works for your organization or your effort. And so we have adapted it along the way. We have been flexible in our use of the framework. And again, we're not evangelizing for this, but it was something that worked for us on several different elements. And we did go to the literature. We were trying to see what worked well for other initiatives. And we did see that there were a lot of other initiatives that were trying to address issues similar to ours. So we've found more than, as you can see here, more than 65 relevant articles in the gray literature and conference papers and presentations that were addressing issues kind of similar to ours. And we thought that this seems like an approach that might be relevant for our work. Being researchers, we thought it would be interesting to also trace our process, and we thought it would be something that would be helpful for people like you who are here today, as well as others who are in the research community, to understand how a process like ours might take place and how it might support the collective impact lens, and where there might also be challenges to the collective impact lens. One of the challenges in collective impact is that it's kind of a heuristic that's built on what's currently happening, but it doesn't have a strong empirical foundation to it. So what we did along the way was to try to reflect empirically, so collect data through interviews and reflecting on our documents about what actually was happening, and to try to think about how we might contribute to the literature. So concurrently, we undertook a study of our own collective impact process. And we did this through conducting interviews with the participants in our change scale process. We also conducted an analysis of our own core group meetings. And then we also had outside observers. So actually one of my doctoral students, who was not a part of the process, observed from the meetings. And through this, we were able then to have a better sense of being able to reflect on our own process. I want to also, at this point, say that, as I mentioned, I was involved in this from the very beginning. What was important for us to be able to do, to be able to reflect back on the process, was have a little bit of distance. So we had, as I mentioned, a doctoral student of mine who was not involved from the beginning, who could take a little bit of distance, do a lot of the review of our meeting notes, do some observations from more of a dispassionate perspective. He worked with me and one of my postdocs who had been involved. He worked with us to kind of develop the framework and to develop an understanding of the process, but he was able to kind of step back a little bit and look at us with a bit of a bird's eye view, to be able to kind of give us some of the analysis that we needed to be able to think about the collective impact process from a distance. In my last 5 minutes, what I'd like to do is I'd like to kind of just compare some of the collective impact conditions that are set out in the overall framework with where we have gone in change scale. And then I'll just end by giving you some thoughts that we've had about what's worked well for us as a collaborative, what's been challenging for us, and what we might recommend to others, especially those of you who are currently undertaking collective impact collaborative work. So as we saw initially, there were about 47% of you, to be exact, who are in collective impact initiatives. And then there were some of you who weren't sure, so maybe there's more than that. But those of you who aren't currently in these kinds of collaborations, who might be in the future, it's also maybe helpful to learn from what we've done. As you heard, we did develop a common agenda, and as I mentioned, all those documents are currently on our ChangeScale website. We would love it if you would, you're welcome to borrow from those. You're welcome to talk with us about what we learned from that, what worked well, what didn't work well. As I mentioned, it was a long process, and parts of it took longer than others. But that's something, and also you'll see there are a lot of other organizations that have their common agendas that are out to share. We also, shared measurement is something I'd like to come back to in a minute, and actually in just a moment, this is going to prime you. We're going to ask you a question about shared measurement. Shared measurement is one of the pieces that was actually initially a driver of creating the collective impact model from FSG, and we're actually not there yet. We've really struggled with shared measurement. As someone who's really excited about this piece, we're working toward this, and we're not there yet. I would actually like to pause at this moment, and I'm going to ask you a poll question now about how many of you are using shared measures and metrics in any project that you're doing in any sort of collaborative. So my next slide, there we go. The next question is, are you a member of a collaborative that has successfully used shared measures and metrics? This can be a collaborative that uses collective impact or not, but any collaborative that has successfully used shared measures and metrics. Yes, no, or not sure. And if you have, just provide a couple of words that maybe, what are you measuring? Are you measuring visitation? Are you measuring knowledge? Are you measuring environmental literacy? Are you measuring knowledge? A couple of words would be super terrific.
And Nicole, as people are thinking, we have several questions in the chat box. Whenever you're ready, we can read them out to you.
I see some great questions there.
Okay.
So I can answer, or at least maybe not fully answer. I can address like all of those questions, and some of the questions that are longer I might save either for the end or maybe for our EE Pro discussion that will draw people there. So one of the questions, let's see, one of the questions I might get to later, well, let's see. One of the questions is, can you give an example of a successful project that your collaborative has done, and then how are you measuring successful? So I'll give you an example of a project that we've done, and then successful is, I think, related to this question we're addressing right now. So some of the projects that we've done is that we have been undertaking ongoing forums and professional development activities for the last several years. And actually, I can't see, I believe that Kirk Ann Taylor, who is our backbone organization, might be on the phone, although she's probably muted, so I will speak for her. Kirk Ann is absolutely terrific. And she has been with us for the last couple of years. And Kirk Ann has been working to, several times a year, we have a congress that brings together people from all over the region. And as part of that day-long congress, we do everything from focusing on the intersection with NGSS and environmental education in the region, to looking at the intersection of research and practice, to focusing very specifically on funding and environmental education in the state of California. What we do at the various professional development workshops is we actually, at each one, ask people what are some of the topics they'd like to see covered at the next one, and then we will do a workshop focused on that at the next one. So we have one large congress a year, and then we have 2 smaller gatherings a year. And those usually draw over 100 people each. We also have been producing environmental education research bulletins, which are also available through the Change Scale website. So we have some kind of hard products, hard outputs, and then we also have these professional development meetings. Another example is that we are working in collaboration with several of the school districts around the area. And I don't know if Craig Strang is on the call today, but Craig Strang, who's at the Lawrence Hall of Science, has been leading up that initiative. And in those school districts, we're working to really integrate, serve as kind of model programs to integrate pathways for environmental education in collaboration with informal partners as well. And so we've currently got several models of those in 3 or 4 districts in the area, and we're right now in the midst of coming up with some measures and metrics for those. So I just see your responses here. We have about 21% of people saying that they've got some shared measures and metrics, about 40% of people saying they haven't, and about 10% of people saying they've not. They're not sure. And of the examples, okay, so those are open-ended questions. So that's something we can share through EE Pro, is what are some of the types of things that you're measuring. So those are some examples of the kinds of projects that we've done. This has been one of the challenges that I will get to at the end. So this is where I was thinking about saving your question, is this idea of mutually reinforcing activities. That is I think one of the key challenges in collective impact, is knowing when it's too soon to move forward on collaborative activities, knowing when you've done enough planning, and knowing when you need to do more planning. So that's kind of where we've had this really interesting dance within our collaborative. And that's where we would love to talk with other collaboratives. I see that a couple of you are also involved in collaboratives. And that's kind of, I think, one of the key dilemmas we've faced. But also, this idea of these mutually reinforcing activities, once you undertake them, it does bolster a sense of efficacy among the partners, and it also allows you to undertake that shared measurement, because it provides you with something to actually measure in light of what your common agenda is. And so, as you'll see, like, each of these are kind of reinforcing of the other, and when you think about these collective impact conditions, none of them can really exist without the other. So I've just put up now this notion of continuous communication. Continuous communication is critical to create these mutually reinforcing activities, is critical to shared measurement, is critical to supporting the common agenda. The backbone support I've just mentioned, Kirk and Taylor, who has functioned as our backbone support. We also have now, just within the past year, been able to hire a second part-time person to be able to support her. And backbone support individual, but also kind of that organization, is what's allowed us to create the theory of change, the vision statement, and the business plan. And having that, we also have a steering committee. I know I've got a couple of steering committee members on this call as well. Having that steering committee and having those core documents has really allowed us to be able to create some of these activities as well. And then finally, really underpinning all of it has been this notion of equity, inclusion, diversity, and relevance. And this goes back to those initial listening sessions and also goes back to the Congress each year and goes back to those professional development gatherings, all of which are really focused in what is it that we're hearing from our community partners, what is it that we're hearing that people on the ground are really wanting from the change scale partners and from the change scale organizations. I'm going to end now with my last about 3 minutes by talking about what some of the dilemmas are that we face, because lest you think that this has been all a walk in the park, some of which has been a walk in the park. We do try to have our meetings at some of our most beautiful locations. But you know, some of the challenges have really existed around, as I alluded to earlier. You know, this notion of defining the problem, it can be challenging. It can be challenging to come to a problem and think, you know, is the challenge around, you know, trying to come up with a shared notion of environmental literacy? Is the challenge around getting people together in a sense of better collaboration? Is the challenge around trying to solve all the environmental issues in the Bay Area? Is the challenge around trying to get more environmental education into schools? So coming up with a crisp problem and then being able to come up with those actual activities to be able to address those problems can be a real challenge. And I think as a collaborative, we have struggled with that off and on. So that has been something that has, you know, kind of continued to plague us, and I think it's something, because of our continuous communication, we've come back to that over and over. This notion too of technical versus adaptive problems. So a technical problem is something that you have good expertise, you have good management, and you can address that as an individual organization or even two organizations working together. But an adaptive problem is one that really requires the whole collaborative to work together. And so we've tried as a collaborative to really only spend our collaborative time and our collaborative resources on the larger scale, more adaptive problems. And so I'd like to just end by suggesting that, you know, we've got some of these dilemmas that we're continuing to face, and I actually think it's really healthy for us to continue to face these within this kind of collective impact frame, which is that, you know, trying to think about, you know, we initially started out by really pretty much focusing on the nonprofit sector. We had some academics in this, but we're now just starting to kind of bring in the school systems, bring in the government sector. We haven't really brought in the private sector yet. And when you look at the collective impact framework, it's keeping true to that framework. It really does talk about the importance of multi-sector participation. And many of you may be participating in those kind of multi-sector partnerships, and it would be fabulous to hear from you about that. This notion of data and shared measurement, and this idea of kind of proving that environmental education works or proving that your programs are working versus improving. The idea that, you know, is it for internal use within the collaborative, or is it really kind of for external use to really communicate and show and use for PR value? So are you collecting those data, and for what use? I already touched on that idea of planning versus action, which we're kind of calling this collective impact paradox. You know, how much planning do you need to do before you're actually really ready to take action? And then finally, this idea of stitch versus scratch. You know, is it do you need to create all new activities in order to feel like you're doing something exciting and new, and to kind of prove to yourselves and prove to your funders and prove to your community that this kind of collective approach is worth the time and worth the effort? Or can you stitch together things that are already existing, and does that kind of create enough synergy to help you keep going and help keep that energy up? So I'd like to end by asking you two questions. future, are you likely to participate in or continue your participation in a collective impact effort? And this maybe reflects back on your initial question. So your choices here are yes, no, and not sure. And as you're doing that, I'm going to look at some of these fabulous questions that have come through.
And some good resources. Margaret has the Building Network. Take a look, everybody, if you can be looking at the questions that other people have asked, and any other resources you might have that you want others to know about would be fantastic as you're answering the question.
And Margaret has made a fabulous point, which is so true, that it's not just continuing communication, but it's about really ongoing and active and like learning from each other, building networks, and building interdependence. And I absolutely agree. I think it's within the participants in our collaborative, which we've got kind of the core steering group, but then we've also got this much larger network, and it is really going beyond just talking to each other to really, it is that kind of synergy that goes beyond that. I totally agree with that. So we've got, this is fabulous. I see that we've got now 66% of people say that they are likely to participate in or continue the participation in a collective impact effort. And I would say too that from my experience in this, and again, not saying that collective impact is the answer to everything, but I think that for us, the guidelines that have come with it have been really helpful. And I think, in particular, really committing to that notion of a backbone has been great, because we are all so strapped in our day-to-day lives. It's been really helpful to have someone who's kind of got nothing but the collaborative in the forefront of her mind. And that, again, that underpinning of diversity, equity, and inclusion has been really fabulous for us as well. So I think the collective impact framework has been really helpful. We have one more question, which is that we are going to be continuing this conversation on EE Pro, which is the NAAE website. And we have a section on that website which is on evaluation and research. And we plan to have kind of a follow-up discussion around collaboration. And within the collective impact frame, as you've heard, there are these kind of different areas. There's shared measures and metrics, this notion of a backbone organization, the underpinning of diversity and equity and inclusion within collective impact, and then also funding, which is always an opportunity and also a challenge. If you were to be able to come to kind of a specific conversation around one of these areas, are there one or two that are particularly of interest to you if you were to have kind of a smaller, more focused conversation? Is there something that would really draw you? Feel free to click select all that apply, but if there's one that's really, top of mind for you, that's terrific. So I'll give you a minute to click on those, and then we'll wrap up. Great, and as we're waiting on your response here, I see a couple of final questions and answers, which is just that I see some people asking for resources, and we absolutely will send a follow-up email within the next couple of days with some resources and some connections to places where you can follow up on this. We would love to see you on the EE Pro, and we'll post the recording on EE Pro. And again, we appreciate that any of the questions that have come up that we've not had a chance to answer, we will answer those through EE Pro, as well as through some links on the email. I love that there's about equal interest in all of these, so that's terrific. So maybe what we'll do is we could have just kind of a general discussion, or we could have some smaller follow-up discussions on each of these topics. So I'd like to just end with my last slide, because it's really important to give thanks and credit to some of my partners in this effort. Matt Bigger is a PhD student I mentioned who helped with the research on some of these topics. Jason Morris is a colleague who was formerly at NatureBridge and who's currently at the Pisces Foundation, who was my initial partner in a lot of the thinking around change scale. And then Kirk Ann Taylor, who is the backbone of change scale, and she's absolutely fabulous. And I just want to thank all of you for thinking through this with me, and would love to hear from any of the rest of you who are doing really interesting collaborative work around the country around environmental education. So thanks so much.
Nicole, thank you so much, and thanks to all of you for such great questions. And Nicole, we're really looking forward to having you continue to follow up on this. I think we could have gone on for about 5 hours so we all understand collective impact and really what the lessons are. Just know that we'll, again, be posting the recording on EE Pro. If you have any questions about any of this, you can contact me or Kristen. As Nicole mentioned, join all of these groups, but the ones you care about the most. But the research and evaluation one is where we're going to continue the conversation. And again, you can also check on EE Pro for additional webinars, not just the ones that we do, but the ones that our colleagues do as well. Nicole, that was so fantastic. Thank you so much. And if you have any questions about how to get onto EE Pro, just contact us, but you do need to sign in, put a profile up so that we can share the information that you have with others. It would be great. And again, our next webinar is on August 23rd at 3 o'clock. Kristen is great, and you don't want to miss her either. And then finally, we hope you are all registering for the NAA conference because Nicole will be there. She's part of our advisory council, and I know she'll have time to talk with all of you more about her research and collective impact. And we're going to have some additional webinars between now and the conference, as well as those following the conference. For example, we're going to have the Diversity and Inclusion Part 2 with everything working. For those of you who are on the one that didn't work so well, we have a lot of great stuff coming up, including something on climate and community resilience, about GIS, and about diversity and inclusion. Again, this is Kristen and my email. If you have any questions, please let us know. And I wanted to mention one other thing, that we have a contest kind of going on right now where we are collecting applicants that are, we're calling it EE 30 under 30, and you can go online just to NAA.org. If you or any of your wonderful young colleagues would like to apply, we're trying to find 30 amazing young people to actually showcase on our website, and we're going to invite 4 or 5 of them to the conference to be part of a closing panel. So all they have to do, or all you have to do to nominate them, is go online. It's a very simple nomination process. So thank you all. Nicole, thank you, and we look forward to seeing you all next month. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.